Something shifts, almost without warning. You reach for what used to lift you, and it doesn't lift. The music plays, and it's just sound. A show you would have binged feels like moving images that never quite touch you. Even the goals that once held your attention like a magnet start to feel distant, like they belong to a different person. The unsettling part isn't only that you're less excited, it's that you can't find the lever to make yourself care the way you used to. You might call it boredom, you might call it burnout, you might worry that something inside you is shutting down. But there's another way to understand this moment, and it's quieter than panic. Sometimes what looks like emptiness is the nervous system lowering the volume after years of living too loud. Sometimes what feels like nothing works anymore is your reward circuitry refusing to keep paying you in the old currency. Not as punishment, more like a recalibration that your mind didn't schedule, but your body did. Dopamine is often described like a pleasure chemical, but it's closer to a drive system. It's the signal that pulls you towards something, the anticipation that makes effort feel worth it. When you've lived in a world of constant stimulation, constant novelty, constant input, constant urgency, your system can start to treat intensity as normal. A steady life begins to feel bland. A quiet moment can feel like absence. And then, eventually, the circuit fatigues. The brain adapts. It protects itself from being dragged by endless craving and endless alertness. The things that once excited you go flat, not necessarily because they lost all value, but because your system can't keep running on that fuel without cost. Overstimulation has a way of mimicking aliveness. It keeps you moving, reacting, consuming, chasing. It can even look productive. But over time, it can create a kind of emotional shutdown, less like depression and more like the body pulling the plug to prevent overload. Think of it the way a phone dims its screen when it overheats. The dimming isn't the phone giving up. It's the phone trying to survive. In humans, the dimming can feel like apathy. Yet apathy and recalibration have different textures. Apathy feels like a dead end. Recalibration feels like a pause that still contains motion underneath, even if you can't see the motion yet. If you're in this phase, it may help to hear this without slogans. You might not be losing interest in life. You might be losing interest in what no longer aligns with who you are becoming. And alignment is not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as the quiet refusal to be entertained by what used to distract you. This is why detachment can arrive before structural change. The outer circumstances might remain the same for a while. Same routine, same environment, same people, yet your inner investment fades. You stop getting the same emotional return. You stop feeling pulled into the same dramas. Even your own old anxieties start to feel repetitive, like a story you've heard too many times to pretend it's new. That can be confusing, because the mind expects the opposite sequence. It expects the world to change first, and then you feel different. But often, the internal decision happens earlier, below the level of language. Something in you has already turned the page, and you're still living in the previous chapter's setting. This is one reason forcing yourself to care again tends to backfire. Trying to resurrect old excitement by sheer will can create a kind of internal friction, like pushing a door that is already unlatched in a different direction. You might try to pump yourself up, set new goals, intensify the pressure, chase the old spark. For a moment, it can work, the way caffeine can borrow energy from tomorrow. Then it drops you back into the same flatness, sometimes with extra exhaustion attached. Not because you failed, because the system is asking for a different baseline. The part of you that used to respond to urgency is tired of being used as a steering wheel. There's a quiet truth here that can feel unsettling. Losing interest is often the first sign that a chapter has ended internally. The ending happens before the announcement, before the move, before the breakup, before the career pivot, before you can explain it to anyone. It ends when your nervous system stops receiving a reward from repeating the same self. And that connects to identity in a way most people don't notice at first. Your goals don't live in a vacuum. They're tied to a version of you, your self-image, your needs, your strategies for belonging, your relationship with approval. Many ambitions are built on a hidden bargain. If I achieve this, I'll finally be safe. If I become this, I'll finally be respected. If I get there, I'll finally feel enough. These bargains can be powerful. They can drive you for years. They can also collapse when identity evolves. Sometimes the exact same goal becomes meaningless once the need underneath it dissolves. Not because the goal was wrong, but because it was serving a psychological function you no longer require in the same way. If you're no longer starving for validation, validation stops tasting like a full meal. If you're no longer trying to prove yourself to the past, proving becomes less interesting. The old rewards don't light you up because the old self isn't running the show the way it used to. That can feel like being unmotivated, but it's subtler than that. It's more like your old identity can't fuel you anymore. The engine still exists, the gasoline changed, and you can't quite find what excites you now because the new desires tend to arrive quietly. They don't always come with fireworks. Often they come as a calm pull, a curiosity that doesn't need to perform. This is where the nervous system starts asking for silence. Not literal silence only, though sometimes that too. More like silence from noise, drama, urgency, constant input. You may notice you're less tolerant of chaotic conversations, less patient with performative conflict, less interested in chasing every update, every opinion, every stimulation. Things that once felt like life start to feel like static. The body rejects overstimulation the way it rejects food that no longer agrees with it. You might even feel physically exhausted by environments you used to handle easily. Crowds, screens, constant messaging, non-stop demands. Your system is trying to settle. Emotional numbness can be part of that settling. It isn't always a sign of collapse. It can be a regulatory pause, a quiet holding pattern where the system stops producing extreme highs and lows because it's tired of the whiplash. At first, calm can feel like emptiness. When you've lived for years in intensity, steadiness can feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious. You may interpret it as nothing matters. Sometimes it's closer to, I'm no longer feeding what drains me. A calmer baseline can be deeply healing, but it can also be disorienting. Without the old spikes of dopamine and urgency, you may not know what to do with a normal day. You might look around and think, so this is it? And that's where the in-between phase begins, the stretch of time where nothing feels compelling. The old purpose is expired. The new clarity hasn't arrived. You're standing in the gap. The gap often feels meaningless, and it tempts you to recreate the old stimulation just to feel alive again. That temptation can be strong. You might reach for drama. You might overwork. You might chase quick pleasures harder than before. You might start new projects impulsively, not because they're aligned, but because you miss the feeling of momentum. It's understandable. The nervous system likes familiarity. Even familiar chaos can feel safer than unfamiliar quiet. But meaning tends to return only after space is allowed. Not forced space, not aesthetic solitude, just honest space. Enough room for your system to hear itself again. There's a metaphor that fits here without exaggeration. Sometimes the water has to stop being stirred before it becomes clear. If you keep shaking the jar, you'll keep getting cloudy answers. The in-between phase is the jar finally being set down. It looks like nothing is happening. Meanwhile, the sediment is settling. The reset isn't the end, it's the reorganization. This is also why the phase can scare you. It carries a specific fear. What if I become indifferent to everything? What if I never care again? What if this is permanent? The mind loves to turn transitional states into permanent identities. It sees a week of flatness and predicts a lifetime. It sees a quiet season and calls it failure. And there's a very real concern people have here, one that deserves respect. Sometimes low mood and loss of interest can be signs of depression. If you're experiencing persistent hopelessness, thoughts of self-harm, an inability to function, or a heavy despair that doesn't lift, it's important to seek professional support and trusted people around you. That isn't weakness, that's care. At the same time, many people confuse recalibration with depression because both can involve a drop in stimulation and desire. The difference is often felt in the directionality. Depression tends to collapse the future. It makes possibility feel unreal. Recalibration tends to quiet the noise so possibility can eventually be heard again. Recalibration can feel empty, but the emptiness has a subtle spaciousness. There's still a thread of movement, even if it's faint. You may not feel joyful, but you might feel strangely honest, less performative, less compelled to pretend. Most people panic right here because panic is an old way of creating intensity. It brings back a familiar feeling, urgency, when calm feels like nothing. Panic also tries to rescue the old identity. It says, get back to normal, get back to productive, get back to wanting. Yet the deeper fear usually isn't about losing interest. It's about losing who you were. The old self had a map. The old self knew how to earn worth, how to chase, how to perform. When that self fades, you're left with uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel like standing in a doorway with no room fully claimed behind you or ahead of you. If you're here, it helps to treat the fear with gentleness rather than arguments. The fear is trying to protect continuity. It's trying to keep you from becoming unrecognizable to yourself. But identity transitions always contain a period of not knowing. That doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're between structures. The mind hates that. The nervous system can learn to tolerate it. This is where a small practice can do more than big explanations. Not a performance, not a fix. More like a brief interruption of the loop that turns sensation into catastrophe. For a few minutes, literally a few, you might try something like this. When you notice the flatness, instead of labeling it as failure, name it as a state. Quietly, internally, low stimulation, or system tired. Then name what emotion is present, even if it's muted. Unease, fear, numb. And then return to a sensation that doesn't require interpretation. The feel of your feet on the floor, the contact of your back against a chair, the coolness of air entering the nose. Not to force calm, just to anchor. Thoughts will still appear. The practice is letting them be thoughts while you remain with the body. It's a small way of telling your nervous system, we don't have to solve the future right now to be here. Repeated briefly, this kind of practice changes something important. It breaks the habit of treating every internal shift as a verdict. It teaches your system that silence isn't danger, that low stimulation isn't collapse, that you can be in a transitional state without rushing to recreate your old self. And this is where control becomes something different, not force, choice. The real control is the ability to choose your next response in the middle of discomfort. When you're tempted to chase stimulation just to feel something, you can choose a different kind of aliveness. A walk without a podcast, a meal without scrolling, a conversation where you listen to your own body while you speak. Simple things, not grand, but they rebuild a quieter baseline. They make space for the new identity to show itself without being drowned out. Over time, you may notice a specific sign that you're done forcing what doesn't fit. Effort starts to feel heavier than release. You can still push yourself, but the pushing feels like dragging furniture across carpet, loud, exhausting, unnecessary. And underneath disengagement, there's often relief. Not a party, not a high, a quiet relief, like setting down a bag you forgot you were carrying. You realize you don't miss certain patterns as much as you thought. You don't miss certain conversations. You don't miss the constant proving. The relief can be so subtle you almost overlook it, but it's there. It's the nervous system telling you, thank you for not making me live that way anymore. This is why it helps to receive this phase as confirmation rather than diagnosis. You're not being labeled, You're being interrupted, gently, before you interpret the fade as failure. Trusting the fade doesn't mean doing nothing forever. It means not resisting the truth that your old life can no longer emotionally sustain you. It means letting the old reward stop working, even if that feels frightening, because that failure of stimulation is sometimes what frees you from a loop you were ready to outgrow. A paradox worth holding just once, without turning it into a slogan. The emptiness that scares you can be the first form of honesty your system has had in a long time. The old excitements might have been real, but they may also have been compensations. When the compensation dissolves, you see what remains. That can feel like nothing. It can also be the beginning of something quieter and more true. Real change often begins before it looks like change. It begins as a loss of appetite for what no longer fits. It begins as tiredness around noise. It begins as an inability to pretend excitement. It begins as the quiet sense that the chapter is already over internally, even if externally you haven't rearranged the furniture yet. So if you're losing interest in everything, it may not mean your life is empty. It may mean your system is demanding a different kind of life, one with a calmer baseline, a truer reward, an identity that doesn't need constant stimulation to feel real. Meaning returns, usually, after you stop trying to force it to show up on command. It returns the way clear water returns after the jar is set down, slowly, naturally, in its own time. For now, it may be enough to stop treating this phase as something to defeat, to let it be what it is, a reset, a pause that contains direction, a quiet ending that makes room for a quieter beginning. And when the new pull arrives, and it will likely arrive without drama, you'll recognize it less as excitement and more as steadiness. A simple sense of, this is worth my life. And even that steadiness can feel unfamiliar at first. If you've spent years associating alive with intensity, then calm might register as absence. The body is used to spikes, a rush of urgency, the quick relief of distraction, the sharp pull of anticipation. When those spikes fade, there's a strange silence that can make you look around and wonder if something is missing. Sometimes what's missing is simply the noise that used to cover everything else. In this quieter baseline, you start noticing what you used to run from. Not in a dramatic way, more like a subtle honesty. You notice how certain places tighten your chest. You notice how certain conversations leave you with a drained, sandy feeling in your mouth, like you've been chewing on something dry. You notice how your mind tries to manufacture urgency when there isn't any, just to feel familiar again. It's almost like the system misses the old alarm bells, even though they exhausted you. That's a normal part of recalibration. The nervous system doesn't immediately trust a calmer world. It checks, it tests, it tries to recreate the old conditions to see if it still knows how to survive them. This is where a lot of people mistake the phase for failure. They assume the old intensity was passion. They assume the new quiet is emptiness. But intensity and meaning aren't the same thing. Intensity can be stress wearing a costume. It can be avoidance that feels productive. It can be the nervous system chasing stimulation because stillness would require you to feel what you've been postponing. Meaning has a different feel. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives like rain, steady, quiet, changing the soil without asking for attention. You might also notice that your sense of time changes. During overstimulation, time can feel fast and thin, like days slipping through your hands. You stay busy, you stay reactive, and yet you reach the end of a week with the same unresolved feeling humming underneath it all. In recalibration, time can feel slower in a different way. Not the clock, but your internal experience. You feel the minutes more. You notice the moment before you reach for your phone. You notice the second after a notification, when your mind wants to follow it like a dog chasing a scent. You notice the point in a conversation when you start performing. These are small moments, but they're where your identity is actually being rewritten.